Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Say It. I'm Sarah.
And I am Mike. Sarah, quick one. Is it beside the point or besides the point?
Honestly, I say both, depending on the day.
Yeah, same here. But only one of them is actually correct.
Wait, really? Which one?
Beside, no S, always. Besides the point is wrong every single time.
Huh, that's genuinely surprising. That phrase feels so natural with an S on it.
Right, and that's exactly why it trips up so many people, even fluent ones.
Okay, here's one for you then. Aside my job, I also volunteer. Does that sound right to you?
It does, actually.
It's not, though. It needs aside from, not just aside, to do that job.
Oh no, so aside's got its own trap too?
Its own trap and its own reason for even being in this episode.
Beside, besides, aside. 3 words, 3 real traps. Let's get into it.
Here's the thing worth saying honestly before we go any further. These 3 traps don't actually share one single job.
Wait, they don't? I thought that was the whole point of these episodes.
Usually, yeah, but this one's different. Beside and besides are basically the same word, one letter apart, meaning 2 completely different things.
Location and addition, right. That's what you meant a second ago.
Exactly. Beside means next to. Besides means in addition to or except for.
And aside?
Aside's actually its own separate word entirely. It only joins this family because of its own phrase, aside from, which ends up doing besides' job.
Oh, I see it now. So it's not 3 cousins sharing one idea, it's 2 words in a spelling trap, and a 3rd word that just happens to overlap through one specific phrase.
That's the one. Honest framing, but genuinely useful once you see it that way.
So really, today's got 2 different lessons hiding inside it.
Right. Spell the first 2 correctly for the right meaning, and remember aside needs from to do that same job.
Okay, that clicks. Quick thing before we keep going. If this kind of honest, no-nonsense breakdown is actually helping, hit subscribe. It genuinely helps us keep making these.
Good place for that. Location, addition, and a bridge word. That's the whole shape of today. Let's start with beside. Beside is genuinely the simpler of the 2.
The location one, no S.
Right, always next to, at the side of something. Imagine sitting down at a movie theater with your brother.
I sat beside my brother.
Notice no S anywhere, and it's always followed directly by a noun. There's no way to just say beside and stop the way you can with aside.
Give me one that's not about people.
Sure. Imagine looking for glasses in a kitchen cupboard.
The glasses are in the cupboard beside the mugs.
Same shape, exactly, just objects instead of people. Still answering where, not why, or in addition to what.
So the test is really just, can I point at it and say right there, next to that thing?
That's the one. Now, here's something genuinely worth knowing beyond the plain meaning. Beside actually feels a little warmer than its plain synonym, next to.
Warmer how?
Next to is purely functional, just spatial, no feeling attached. Beside can carry a closer, more intimate sense. She stood beside him sounds more meaningful than she stood next to him.
Give me one more, a different kind of closeness.
Imagine someone supporting a friend through a hard time. I'll be beside you through this carries real warmth. Swap in next to, and it suddenly sounds oddly clinical.
That's a nice detail. Same location, but the word choice actually changes how much you care about it.
Exactly. But here's a real, practical boundary worth knowing, and it cuts the other direction. With something large, a building, a house, a car, native speakers almost always reach for next to instead.
Wait, really? Even though beside technically still works?
Even though it's technically fine, beside the building just sounds slightly off to a native ear. Next to the building is what you'd actually hear.
Give me one more, just to lock in the pattern.
Sure. The car is parked next to the house. Sounds completely natural. The car is parked beside the house sounds a touch stranger, even though nobody would call it wrong.
Okay, that clicks. So the warmth only really shows up with people or small personal things, and once you're talking about a big object, that warmth doesn't really apply anymore.
That's exactly the pattern. One more genuine layer to this word, and it's less commonly known. Beside can also mean compared with.
Compared with? Like a comparison?
Exactly. Imagine looking at your own work right after seeing someone clearly more skilled.
My project seems amateur beside yours.
Right. That's not about location at all anymore. It's a genuine comparison, no physical proximity involved whatsoever.
Give me one more, something less personal.
Beside other technologies, AI is considered the most advanced.
So in both of those, beside is basically standing in for compared to, and the location's meaning's completely gone.
Location, warmth, the large object boundary, and comparison, all living inside one small word.
I actually didn't expect this one to have this much depth.
Glad it landed that way because it leads perfectly into the one idiom that started this whole episode. Beside the point, right? From the hook.
Exactly that one. Let's actually unpack why it's beside, never besides, since we only rushed through it at the very start.
I'm ready. Give me the wrong version first.
Imagine someone arguing about something completely unrelated to the actual issue. That's besides the point.
That's the version I say constantly, honestly.
Most people do, and it's wrong every single time. The correct version is always beside the point. No S, ever.
Wait, but why? Besides means in addition to, and this idiom feels like it's adding something.
That's exactly the trap. It's not really adding anything. It's actually describing distance from the real issue, off to the side of it, away from the actual topic.
Oh, so it's genuinely a location idiom, not an addition idiom, even though it doesn't feel that way at first.
Exactly right. Give me a real sentence using it correctly.
Whether you like the color is beside the point. The real question is whether it actually works.
Right. And notice you're saying that opinion is sitting off to the side, away from what actually matters here.
One more, just to lock it in.
Sure, he kept mentioning the cost, but honestly, that's beside the point. We already agreed to pay it.
So the cost is just sitting off to the side, not actually relevant to the decision anymore.
Exactly that image every time. Beside the point, never besides.
This is genuinely one of those rules I'll never forget now, because I finally understand why, not just what. And that's actually the perfect mindset heading into besides, since it genuinely does more work than beside ever does.
More work how?
For one, it means something completely different. In addition to, apart from, except for. Imagine asking someone about their hobbies beyond the obvious one.
Besides painting, what other hobbies do you have?
Right. Notice painting there is a gerund, not a plain noun, and besides handles that fine.
Quick note for anyone still shaky on gerunds versus infinitives. We've actually got a whole episode just on that.
Good one to pair with this. Now, give me a plain noun instead.
I have many goals besides graduating.
Same job, just a different kind of object after it. One more, something a little more personal.
Besides her sister, nobody really understands what she's going through.
Right, and notice how naturally that reads, besides quietly setting one person apart from everyone else. Now here's the more work part I mentioned. Besides can also stand completely alone, opening a whole new sentence.
Like how?
Imagine turning down a fishing trip and adding one more reason on top of the first.
I dislike fishing. Besides, I don't own a boat.
Exactly. Notice besides isn't attached to a noun there at all. It's just introducing a whole extra thought.
Beside can never do that, right? It always needs a noun right after it.
Never. That's a real structural difference, not just a meaning one. Okay, here's the genuinely tricky layer now. Sometimes besides is unclear about whether something's included or excluded.
Wait, really? How do you even tell?
There's actually a decent clue. Look for a word like anyone, nothing, or everyone right before besides.
What does that word actually do?
Think about what anyone means on its own first. It's already saying every single person, no limits.
Right, it's already the biggest possible group.
Exactly. So when besides shows up right after a word that big, all it can really do is carve one small piece out of that huge group. Imagine someone at a party where they barely know anyone.
He didn't know anyone besides his brother.
Right. Anyone already means everybody, full stop. Besides just pulls his brother back out of that group as the only exception.
Oh, so it's not besides doing anything special, it's really anyone setting up a huge group first and besides just poking a hole in it.
That's the one. Now, compare it to a sentence with no big word like that at all. Besides his job, he also volunteers at a shelter.
Know anyone, know nothing, nothing that big.
Right, and without that big word, there's no huge group to poke a hole in. Besides is just quietly adding a second separate fact. He's got a job and he volunteers. Both true.
Okay, that clicks now. If there's a giant word like anyone nearby, besides is carving an exception out of it. If there isn't, besides is just adding something new.
Exactly right. And I'll be honest, it's not airtight every time. There's a real example of a contractor asking, "Do you want to paint anything besides your kitchen?" And people genuinely disagreed on whether the kitchen was included.
Even with anything right there?
Even then, it usually works, but when it really matters, it's worth just saying it more plainly instead of relying on besides alone.
Good to know there's a real trick even if it's not airtight. What about a word that's never ambiguous like this?
Good instinct. Except for and other than are always exclusion. No ambiguity ever. Everyone came except for John can only mean John didn't come.
So besides is flexible, but that flexibility comes with a real cost sometimes.
Exactly right. Quick separate thing before we move on. There's a whole ladder of similar words, depending on how formal you want to sound.
Go on.
At the top, formal writing. Furthermore, moreover. Furthermore, the data supports this conclusion.
And besides sits where on that ladder?
Right in the comfortable middle, along with also. Fine in both formal and casual settings, just not genuinely academic writing.
And the casual end?
Plus, on top of that, what's more? Plus, I'm exhausted anyway. One small tip, don't stack several of these in a row. It starts sounding repetitive fast.
Is there a casual spoken shortcut for besides itself, or does it stay the same everywhere?
Actually, yes. Sides, dropping the B entirely. You'll mostly hear it from close friends or family, in relaxed conversation, never in writing or anything formal.
Give me an example of when it actually fit.
Imagine turning down a plan with a sibling, nothing serious. Sides, I don't even own a boat. It works there because the whole moment is casual and you already know each other well.
So it's not something I'd say to my boss.
Definitely not. Save it for genuinely relaxed, familiar conversation, the same place you'd use gonna or kinda.
I've actually heard that and never once connected it back to besides.
And now that both words have their full shape, let's actually test that shape against each other fast.
A grill?
A drill. I'll give you a sentence, you tell me if it's right or wrong, and fix it if it's wrong.
Let's go. Hit me.
Besides the chairs, leave the table outside.
Wrong. That's describing location, so it needs beside, no S, beside the chairs.
Nailed it. Next one. Besides English, she speaks French.
Also wrong, but the opposite mistake. That's addition, so it needs besides. Besides English, she speaks French.
There it is, the other direction entirely. One more. That's completely besides the point.
Wrong, and we already know this one. Beside the point. Always, no exceptions.
Right on.
Good catch. Next one?
Besides, I don't even want to go.
That one's actually correct. Besides, standing alone, opening a new thought, no noun needed.
Nailed it again. Last one, and this one's a real curveball. The car is parked beside the office building.
Technically that's not wrong, but it sounds slightly off. Next to would be more natural since the building's large.
Exactly the right catch. Not a hard error, just an unnatural choice. 5 rounds, and you caught every single trap.
Honestly, this drill made the whole rule feel automatic in a way the explanations alone didn't.
And here's honestly the best part of this whole topic, something that might make you feel a lot better about ever mixing these up.
What's that?
These two words weren't always separate at all. For a long time, beside and besides were basically interchangeable, used almost the same way.
So this isn't just a modern learner mistake?
Not even close. English speakers themselves used them interchangeably for centuries. They only really split apart into today's clean location versus addition roles within the last couple hundred years.
So the confusion I feel is basically an echo of how English used to actually work.
Exactly that. And there's a genuinely neat reason for how besides even got its S in the first place.
Go on.
It's the exact same ending that turned always into always, and sometimes into sometimes. Beside just got that same little S added onto it.
Oh, so besides isn't some random extra letter, it's the same pattern hiding behind a bunch of other words too.
The exact same pattern. So next time you catch yourself hesitating between these two, remember you're not failing at English. You're bumping into a genuine 200-year-old shift that native speakers themselves lived through.
That's honestly really comforting, actually. This is a mistake with real history behind it, not just me being careless.
Genuinely comforting. And that same honest spirit is exactly how aside deserves to arrive too, since it's not really a cousin of the first two at all.
Right, you mentioned that all the way back in the hook. It's its own separate word.
Completely separate. Aside on its own means to one side, physically or mentally, out of the way. Imagine someone blocking a hallway.
Step aside, please.
Right, pure physical movement. Out of the path. Give me one that's more mental than physical.
I need to put my doubts aside and just make a decision.
Exactly. Same core image, just moved into your head instead of a hallway. There's a third flavor too, more like setting something in reserve.
Like saving something for later.
Exactly that. Set aside money for college. Nothing's physically moving anywhere, but the core image still the same. Something pulled away from the main flow, kept for later.
Okay, that clicks. Physical, mental, and reserve. All one core picture, just applied differently.
That's the one. Now here's exactly where it joins this episode's family. Aside alone can't do besides job. You need the full phrase, aside from.
Right, from the hook, that was the trap.
Exactly, that trap. Imagine describing what you did on a trip besides the usual sightseeing.
Aside from the museums, we mostly just relaxed.
Right. And notice that's functioning exactly like besides would there. Give me one more, a slightly different flavor, more like an exception.
Aside from a few small issues, everything went smoothly.
Exactly. Same bridge, doing besides exact job. One more, something at work.
Aside from the budget concerns, the client seemed happy with the pitch.
Right. 3 completely different settings, and every time aside from is quietly standing in for besides. One regional note worth knowing. Aside from leans American in this sense, while apart from leans a bit more British.
Good to know since I've genuinely heard both and never noticed a pattern there.
Genuinely never noticed a pattern either, honestly. And speaking of patterns, aside actually has one of the most flexible idiom shapes in English.
Flexible how?
You can basically drop any topic in front of aside, and it means setting that topic apart. Let's talk plainly about something else. Imagine a friend telling a joke right before delivering serious news.
Joking aside, we really need to finish this project.
Exactly. Joking gets set apart, and now you're speaking plainly. Give me a completely different topic.
Money aside, would you actually enjoy that job?
Right. Same shape, totally different topic. One more, something a little more personal.
Family drama aside, the wedding itself was beautiful.
Perfect. And notice, the pattern never changes. Whatever noun you put there just gets pushed to the side, and the real point comes right after.
Quick thing though, I've heard all joking aside too. Is that different?
Same idea, just a slightly fuller version. All joking aside and joking aside are both completely standard.
Good to know, since I honestly wasn't sure which one was correct.
Now, here's something genuinely fun. Aside actually builds a whole family of phrasal verbs, all sharing one image, something moving out of the main path.
Give me a few.
Set aside, put aside, lay aside, cast aside, brush aside, sweep aside, wave aside, thrust aside, shoulder aside, stand aside, step aside.
Wow, that's a lot for one small word.
It really is, and every single one keeps that same core picture, moving something out of the way, whether that's physical, emotional, or just dismissive. She brushed aside his concerns is emotional. He shouldered aside the crowd is completely physical.
Okay, so even though the actions are totally different, the underlying image never changes.
Exactly right. One small, fun, real-world use of this family before we move on. Set aside is actually current office jargon.
Jargon how?
In meetings, let's set that aside often means postponing a discussion, sometimes permanently. What it really means is closer to, I don't want to talk about this right now, or possibly ever.
Oh no, that's brutally accurate, honestly.
There are actual synonyms for the same corporate dodge, too. Park this issue. Put a pin in it.
Classic office language. Dressing up, we're never discussing this again, as something polite.
Corporate jargon really does love a soft landing for hard truths. There's a whole batch of other words worth knowing before we move on, though. Quick ones.
Quick meaning we're not teaching these the same way?
Right. Just enough to recognize them. First, alongside. It's easy to assume it's just a fancier beside, but it actually carries real movement or partnership.
Give me an example.
Imagine 2 buildings constructed at the same time, right next to each other. The new building was constructed alongside the old one.
That still sounds like plain location to me, honestly.
It's location, but with a hint of parallel movement, side by side, growing together. Now compare it to genuine teamwork. She worked alongside her colleagues to complete the project.
Oh, that one's not really about location at all. That's collaboration.
Exactly. And here's the real trap. People sometimes reach for besides when they actually mean alongside. Besides working on the project, I also helped my colleague is wrong.
Wait, why? That sounds like it could be addition.
Because it's not addition, it's simultaneous teamwork. The correct version is alongside working on the project, describing active collaboration, not one extra fact tacked on.
Okay, that clicks. So even after mastering beside and besides, alongside can still trip you up in its own separate way.
Exactly right. Next, beside oneself, a genuine idiom. It means overwhelmed, agitated, out of control emotionally.
Give me one.
She was beside herself when she found she'd lost her ring. Pure overwhelm. Could be anger, grief, even joy.
Give me one that's clearly joy, not anger or grief.
Sure. Peter was beside himself with joy. He'd won the poetry award. Same phrase, completely different emotion, but the same overwhelmed feeling underneath.
Huh, that's actually a strange phrase when you think about it literally.
It makes more sense once you know beside used to mean outside of. Beside yourself literally meant outside yourself, outside your own self-control.
Oh, that actually makes it click. Last one?
Last one, and it's genuinely fun. But let's slow down for a second, because it's easy to rush past. Aside is also a literary term.
What does it actually mean, step by step?
On stage, one character speaks a short line, and by theatrical convention, the audience hears every word.
But the other characters standing right there don't?
Exactly. That's the whole trick. The other characters are pretending not to hear it, even though they're standing right there. It's a private moment shared only between one character and the audience.
Oh, I see it now. So there are really two separate audiences in that moment, the people watching the play and the other characters in the scene, and only one of them gets the truth.
That's the one. Shakespeare used this constantly. In Othello, Iago turns to the audience and reveals his whole scheme, while the other characters on stage keep believing he's completely loyal.
So we, the audience, know he's lying, but nobody else in the scene does.
Exactly that gap, and that gap is the entire point of an aside. Alongside, beside oneself, and the theatrical aside, three genuinely fun, useful words to just recognize going forward.
This whole episode really did have more hiding inside it than I expected.
And now let's actually see how much of it's stuck before the roleplay.
Quiz time. Hit me.
Fill in the blank. Blank, I'm not even hungry anymore. Casual, standalone, no noun after it.
Besides, standing completely alone, opening a new thought.
There it is. My turn to answer yours.
Okay. Nobody showed up, blank, my cousin. Spot which meaning this is first.
Exclusion because of nobody, besides, and it means only the cousin came, no one else.
Nailed it. Your turn again.
Blank, managing the budget, she trained 2 new hires this month. What's actually wrong with this one, if anything?
Nothing's wrong, actually. That's genuine addition. 2 separate facts, so besides is correct there.
Good catch. Not every sentence has an error. My turn again.
This one's about the stage. What's the actual difference between an aside and just talking to yourself?
An aside is heard by the audience on purpose, while the other characters pretend not to hear it. It's a shared secret between one character and us.
That's the one. Last one, and it's about feeling, not grammar. Give me a sentence using beside himself, and tell me it doesn't have to be about anger.
He was beside himself with excitement when the acceptance letter arrived. Same phrase, but pure excitement this time, nothing angry about it.
5 for 5 again.
Honestly, the theatrical one surprised me.
I also didn't expect to actually remember that so clearly.
Let's hear all of this working together in one real conversation.
Let's do it. Two friends catching up after a long week.
Hey, how was moving weekend? Did everything go okay?
Mostly. My brother sat beside me the whole drive, which helped a lot, honestly.
That's sweet. Besides the drive, was there anything else stressful?
Actually, yeah. The new apartment's great, aside from the leaky faucet in the kitchen.
Oh no, that's rough. Did you set that aside for now or already call someone?
Set it aside for now, honestly. Between work and unpacking, I just don't have the energy this week.
Fair enough. Was anyone helping besides your brother?
Nobody besides him, actually. Everyone else was busy that weekend.
Man, that's a lot on two people. Were you beside yourself by the end of it?
Completely. Beside myself with exhaustion, not excitement, unfortunately. Joking aside, though, I'm genuinely glad it's over.
I bet. Let's pause there for a second, actually, because that short conversation had 7 different uses packed into it.
7? Genuinely?
Genuinely. And we caught almost every version of today's words without even trying. Let's go back through it slowly, one at a time.
Good idea. First one. My brother sat beside me.
Pure location, no S. Someone physically next to someone else.
Besides the drive, was there anything else stressful?
The addition, asking about something beyond just the drive itself.
Aside from the leaky faucet.
The bridge phrase, doing besides exact job there.
3 down. Next up, the phrasal verb and the trickier ambiguity one.
Go for it.
Set that aside for now.
The phrasal verb, postponing it, moving it out of the main path.
Nobody besides him.
The exclusion, nobody already means everyone, and besides carves out the one exception, his brother.
Last 2, both a little more emotional than the rest.
Go on.
Beside myself with exhaustion.
The idiom, overwhelmed. And notice, it wasn't even a happy feeling this time.
Joking aside.
The idiom pattern, setting the joke apart, speaking plainly right after.
7 different moments, and every single one landed exactly where it should.
And honestly, that's a great note to close on.
We really did cover a lot. Let's recap it fast.
Beside, no S, location, next to something.
Besides, with an S, addition or exception, and sometimes genuinely ambiguous between the two.
Aside, its own word, to one side, and aside from bridges into besides job.
And never forget, beside the point, never besides.
So here's your practice for today. Write one beside, besides, or aside sentence in the comments. Something true about your actual week.
We read every single one.
And if you enjoyed today's word confusion angle, check out our episode on unless, if not, and provided that. Same kind of trap, different corner of English.
That one pairs nicely with this.
Subscribe to Say It if you haven't already.
Take care, everyone.
Bye, everyone!